Dr. Gerald Harmon slammed the patient chart onto the nurse's station counter so hard that every head in the ward snapped up. "Mitchell," he barked loud enough for the entire emergency floor to hear, "if you can't follow a simple triage protocol without holding everyone's hand, then what exactly are you doing in my hospital?" "Rebecca." Mitchell stood completely still, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere past his shoulder. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. And that stillness seemed to enrage him further. "You're a liability," he said, dropping his voice to something colder and more deliberate. "One more mistake, and I will personally see to it that your nursing license is reviewed." He walked away without waiting for her response. The entire ward had watched, and not one person said a word. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. Sergeant Ethan Brooks had not planned on spending his Tuesday evening in the emergency room of Fort Calloway Medical Center. He had planned on eating a cold sandwich, watching whatever game happened to be on, and going to sleep at a reasonable hour for once in his adult life. The universe, as it often did, had other ideas. The injury wasn't dramatic by Ethan's standards. A sparring session with two younger soldiers from his unit had gone longer than expected, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark, his left knee had reminded him loudly and without apology that he was 38 years old and not 22. The medic on base had looked at the swelling, made a face that Ethan had learned to distrust, and told him he needed imaging done. So here he was, in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and bad decisions, filling out paperwork with a pen that barely worked. He noticed her before she noticed him. She was moving through the floor with the kind of efficiency that people either have naturally or spend years trying to fake. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She checked a monitor, adjusted something on a chart, spoke briefly to another nurse, and moved on all within the span of about 45 seconds. Ethan had spent his entire career learning to read people quickly, and what he read in her was someone who was very good at what she did and very tired of having to prove it. Her name badge said R. Mitchell RN. She looked to be somewhere in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, no makeup, practical shoes. The kind of face that would be easy to overlook in a crowd which he suspected she counted on. A younger nurse caught her at the edge of the station. "Doctor, Harmon's already asking for the Brooks file," the younger woman said, her voice low and apologetic as though delivering bad news. Rebecca didn't look up from what she was doing. "Then tell Dr. Harmon the Brooks file will be ready when the Brooks file is ready." The younger nurse blinked. "He's not going to like that." "He never likes anything," Rebecca said, and her voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had long since stopped trying to change that fact. Ethan, sitting close enough to hear all of this, found himself unexpectedly entertained. He said nothing. He waited. When Rebecca finally crossed to him with a clipboard and a blood pressure cuff, she sat down across from him with the brisk professionalism of someone working through a checklist. "Sergeant Brooks," she said. "That's me. Left knee? Sparring injury?" She wasn't asking. She had already read the intake form. "Any history of prior injury to this joint?" "2 surgeries," he said, 2009 and 2014, both overseas. She made a note. "On a scale of 1 to 10 current pain level, 4. She looked up at that, not because it was surprising, but because something in how he said it caught her attention. "A 4, she repeated. "I've had worse days." She studied him for a moment, not with curiosity exactly, but with the focused attention of someone recalibrating. "I'm sure you have," she said, and went back to the form. "Any current medications?" "Nothing prescription." "Allergies, penicillin." She wrote it down. Then she reached across to wrap the blood pressure cuff around his arm, and for a moment they were silent, the machine cycling between them, the noise of the emergency floor pressing in from every side. His pressure read fine. It always read fine. He had been told more than once that his nervous system was unreasonably calm. He had never decided whether that was a compliment. "The doctor will be in within the hour," Rebecca said, beginning to stand. "Was that true?" Ethan asked. She paused. "Was what true what you said to the other nurse? About the file being ready when it's ready?" Rebecca looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "It was true. You don't seem like someone who bluffs." "I'm not," she said, and she walked away. He watched her go, and he thought in the detached, observational way that had kept him alive in a lot of situations that should have killed him, that she was the most contained person he had encountered in a long time. Not cold, contained. There was a difference. Cold people built walls because they were afraid. Contained people built walls because they had learned at some point that letting things out cost more than keeping them in. He wondered briefly what it had cost her. Dr. Gerald Harmon arrived 40 minutes later, carrying the attitude of a man who had been inconvenienced by Ethan's existence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, though with the kind of silver hair that looked expensive to maintain. He reviewed the chart without greeting, asked 3 questions in rapid succession without waiting for complete answers, and pronounced that Ethan would need an MRI before anyone could say anything definitive. He said this as though it were somehow Ethan's fault. "Standard procedure," Harmon said, not looking up. "You'll wait for imaging." "How long?" "However long it takes." He closed the chart. "Mitchell will handle the rest." He said her name the way some people say the name of an appliance that has been underperforming. Then he was gone. Ethan stared at the empty doorway for a moment. Rebecca reappeared within 2 minutes carrying a consent form for the MRI and an expression that revealed exactly nothing. She set the form down beside him and handed him a pen. "He talks to you like that often?" Ethan asked. She didn't look up. "Sign at the bottom and initial where it's highlighted." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." She pointed to the signature line. "Please." He signed, he initialed, he handed the pen back. And then, because he had spent his whole life in situations where silence was a tool and patience was a weapon, he simply waited to see what she would do next. What she did next, he had not remotely anticipated. She took the consent form from him, tucked it against her clipboard, and then, without changing her expression, without any kind of preamble, without any signal that what she was about to say was anything other than ordinary, she looked at him directly and said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to hear it out before you respond." Ethan said nothing. He nodded once. "I'm going to need help," she said. "The kind of help that isn't easy to ask for. The kind that most people would say no to immediately." She paused. Not for effect, he could tell she wasn't the type for theatrical pauses. She paused because she was choosing her words with absolute care. "I want to have a child," she said, "and I'm asking if you would be willing to help me do that." The emergency floor continued exactly as it had been. Monitors beeped. Someone down the hall called out for assistance. A gurney rolled past the doorway. The entire world carried on as though nothing unusual had just happened, which was absurd because something extremely unusual had just happened. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He had the specific skill developed over nearly 2 decades in the Army of not showing what he was thinking. He used that skill now. "Say that again," he said. "I want to have a child," she repeated in exactly the same tone. "I'm asking if you would consider helping me." "You're asking me," he said slowly, "a man you have known for approximately 45 minutes. 43, she said, and 43 minutes to..." He stopped. He started again. "I need you to help me understand what you're asking." "I'm asking you to be a biological father," she said. "Not a partner, not a co-parent in any traditional sense. I have the details worked out. I'm not asking impulsively." She held his gaze without flinching. "I know how this sounds." "Do you?" And he said. "Yes," she said, "I do, and I'm asking anyway because I have thought about it for a long time and I have run out of alternatives that feel right, and you..." She stopped. Just for a fraction of a second, something crossed her face that wasn't quite composure. "You seemed like someone who could hear something without panicking." He almost laughed. He controlled it. "What made you think that?" "The way you said 4, she said quietly, "when I asked about your pain level. Most people say a number, and it tells you everything about how they handle difficulty. You said 4 like it was just information, like pain was just a thing that happened and you were just reporting it." She looked down briefly, then back up. "I've been paying attention to how people handle hard things for a long time. It's the most useful thing I know how to do." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Something about what she had just said landed somewhere he hadn't expected. He was not by nature a person who was easily reached. But that particular observation had reached something. "What happened to the conventional options?" he asked. "Donor banks, fertility clinics?" I've been through 2 rounds of IUI, she said, both unsuccessful. I'm 36, my window is narrowing. Fertility clinics cost money I don't have in the quantities they require. And donor banks, she stopped again. I need this to feel like a real decision, not a transaction. And asking a stranger in an emergency room feels more real than a donor bank. You're not a stranger, she said. Not completely. We've known each other for 43 minutes. I've read your file, she said. The room, which had felt reasonably stable a moment ago, shifted slightly. What file? He said. Rebecca set the clipboard down on the tray beside him. Your base file. The general portion, the accessible portion, service record, conduct history commendations, medical history. I requested it from intake. She said this the way other people said they had checked the weather. I've been watching you for 6 weeks. The quiet that followed that sentence was a different kind of quiet than the one before it. 6 weeks, Ethan said. You've been at this base for 8 weeks, she said. I first treated a soldier from your unit 5 weeks ago. I recognized your name from the incident report. You were the one who carried him 300 yards under fire before the medic could get to him. Private Delgado. He talks about you. She looked at him without apology. I started paying attention after that. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Not from anger. From something more complicated than anger. You investigated me, he said. I researched you, she said. There's a difference, Marcus. From where I'm sitting, the difference is pretty thin. I know. She didn't retreat from it. I know it is. And I'm telling you because you deserve to know and because I don't want to build this on something hidden. She took a breath. If you want to walk out of here and never think about this again, that's the right choice and I'll respect it completely. But I needed you to know that I didn't choose you randomly. Ethan looked at the ceiling, just for a second. Then he looked back at her. Why not someone you actually know, he said. A friend, a colleague. Because I know what happens when you involve someone close to you in something this complicated, she said quietly. I've watched it happen. It changes the relationship, and then it changes the child's life, and then nothing is ever clean again. She shook her head slightly. I needed someone who was good, fundamentally good, but who wasn't already threaded into my life in a way that would create complications. And you decided I was fundamentally good. Your unit calls you the wall, she said. Not because you're cold, because nothing gets past you when there's someone behind you worth protecting. She let that sit between them for a moment. That's not nothing, Sergeant. He was very quiet, the kind of quiet that meant he was thinking hard in the specific way that trained soldiers think, not emotionally, not impulsively, but going through the variables one by one, laying them out in order, testing each one for structural integrity before moving to the next. You said you had the details worked out, he said finally. I do. Walk me through them. Something moved behind her eyes. Not relief, she wasn't the type to show relief early, but something close to it. She pulled a stool from the corner of the room and sat down, and for the next 20 minutes, in the measured, precise language of someone who had rehearsed this and was now forcing herself past the rehearsal into the real thing, she talked. She talked about the legal framework, a document she had already had drafted by a family attorney, a colleague's contact, someone she trusted. The document would make his paternal rights a matter of mutual choice, clearly defined, clearly limited. She was not asking him to be a father in the traditional sense. She was asking him to give something that could not be manufactured and could not be replaced. She talked about finances, that she had savings, that she had insurance through the hospital, that she had already researched the cost of prenatal care and anticipated childcare and single-parent logistics, and that she had run the numbers against her salary 3 times. She talked about what she was not asking for. She was not asking for a relationship. She was not asking for co-parenting. She was not asking for regular involvement, though she said this last part was something complicated, underneath it, something she didn't quite finish. And then near the end of what she was saying, she said something she had clearly not planned to say. He could tell because for the first time since he had met her, she looked slightly away before she said it. My mother had me alone, she said, and she never once made me feel like I was missing something. But when I was 9, I asked her once if she thought I should know my father, and she said, Rebecca stopped. She cleared her throat quietly. She said that what a child needs isn't a complete family. What a child needs is to be chosen. Deliberately, not accidentally, not out of obligation. She looked back at him. I want to choose this, every part of it, and I want this child to know from the very beginning that they were chosen. The silence that settled after that was deep and still and very heavy. The way silences get when something true has been said in a room with no escape. Ethan said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to need time. Of course, she said immediately. This is not a decision I make in a hospital room in under an hour. I know. And I have questions. A lot of questions. I would worry about you if you didn't, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. In the flat overhead light of the exam room, with the noise of the emergency floor pressing at the door, and somewhere distant, a man shouting about his insurance, Ethan Brooks had the strange and disorienting sensation of meeting someone he had somehow been expecting. Why are you a nurse? He asked. Not because it was the most important question, but because he wanted to hear how she answered questions that weren't about the request. He wanted to hear who she was when the thing she wanted wasn't on the table. She considered it for a moment, not defensively, genuinely. Because I spent a lot of time being scared, she said finally, and the only thing that made the fear manageable was being useful, doing something that actually helped. She tilted her head slightly. Is that relevant? Everything's relevant, he said. He watched her absorb that. And for one unguarded instant, just before she reassembled her composure, he saw something in her face that he recognized, the look of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has gotten very good at making it look light. He had worn that same look himself. He knew exactly how much it weighed. The MRI technician came for him shortly after, and Rebecca gathered her clipboard and handed him a card, plain white, her name and a cell number written in neat, clear handwriting. No hospital letterhead. Personal. Take whatever time you need, she said. I'll be in touch, he said. She nodded once and walked out of the room, and he watched her move back into the organized chaos of the floor. Steady, efficient, contained, and he thought about the 9-year-old girl who had asked her mother a question about fathers, and the woman who had built an entire plan around the answer she received, and the strange and enormous nerve it took to walk up to a stranger and say out loud the thing you needed most. He turned the card over in his hand. Just her name. Just a number. He put it in his shirt pocket and followed the technician down the hall. The MRI came back clean enough, no structural damage, just inflammation, and the kind of deep tissue bruising that the body hands out as punishment for ignoring its age. The orthopedic resident who delivered the news looked about 26 years old and used the phrase, "take it easy," with the confidence of someone who had never once been asked to do otherwise. Ethan thanked him, accepted the prescription he didn't plan to fill, and left the hospital at 11:40 at night with a wrapped knee, a discharge form, and a small white card in his shirt pocket that he had touched exactly 4 times without meaning to. He drove back to base with the radio off. That was unusual for him. He was not by nature a man who sought silence. Silence in his experience had always meant that something was wrong or something was coming, and he had trained himself to fill quiet space with information, news, weather, anything that kept the situation mapped. But tonight the silence sat in the car with him like a passenger, and he let it because his head was already too loud to add anything else to it. She had researched him. 6 weeks. She had pulled his base file, read his service record, tracked a conversation with one of his men, and constructed a case that she then walked into an emergency room and delivered to his face without a single tremor in her voice. The audacity of it should have made him angry. He kept waiting for the anger to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead in its place was something that felt unsettlingly like respect. He lay awake until 2 in the morning, not tossing, not restless, just lying on his back in the dark of his quarters, staring at the ceiling, running through the conversation the way he ran through mission debriefs linearly, without emotion, picking out each piece and examining it separately before putting it back. She wanted a child. She had a plan. She had a lawyer. She had run the numbers. She had thought about the child's future identity and the child's emotional landscape and the legal structure that would govern what he was and wasn't to that child. She had done in all of this before she walked up to him. The only thing she hadn't done was ask, until she did. He thought about the way she had said it, not the words, the way, even, direct, watching his face for panic and finding none. What a child needs is to be chosen. He turned that over several times. He had heard a lot of things said in his life that were meant to be profound and turned out to be hollow. That one didn't feel hollow. That one felt like something a person only says if they have believed it long enough for it to become bone. He fell asleep around 2:30. He dreamed about nothing he could remember. He did not call her the next day. He wasn't ready to call. What he did instead was something he had not expected to do. He went and found Private First Class Marco Delgado. Delgado was in the base gym doing light work on his recovering shoulder, the kind of careful half effort that looks like discipline but is mostly just trying to prove to yourself that you're still functional. He was 24 years old, dark-eyed and wiry, with the permanent expression of a man waiting for something to go wrong so he could handle it. He spotted Ethan the moment he walked in and straightened up immediately the way soldiers do. "Sergeant Brooks." "At ease," Ethan said. "I'm not here officially." Delgado relaxed slightly. "Your knee okay? I heard you went to the med center." "It's fine." Ethan sat down on the bench across from him. "You know the nurses over there?" It wasn't a question, but Delgado answered it like one. "Few of them, yeah. They patched me up pretty well when I came in back in March." "Mitchell," Ethan said. "Rebecca Mitchell." Something shifted in Delgado's face. Not suspicion. Something warmer than that and more careful. "Nurse Mitchell," he said. "Yeah, she was the one who—" He stopped, looked at Ethan. "Why, what am I? What do you know about her?" Delgado was quiet for a moment in the way that young men are quiet when they're deciding how much to say. "She's the one who stayed," he said finally. "When I came in, I was in bad shape. You know that. And there were a lot of people moving around doing their jobs, which was fine. That's what they're supposed to do. But she's the one who stayed in the room after everything was stabilized and just sat there. She didn't talk. She didn't ask how I was feeling every 5 minutes. She just stayed." He looked at his hands. "I asked her why once, when I was doing better. She said somebody had done it for her once, and it had mattered." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What else?" "She doesn't take anything from Harmon," Delgado said immediately, as though that were the most important piece of information available. "That guy is a piece of work. You see the way he talks to people? She's the only one on the floor who doesn't flinch. Everyone else just takes it." He shook his head. "She doesn't." "You think she's good at her job?" "I think she kept me from losing that shoulder," Delgado said simply. "So yeah, I think she's good at her job." Ethan stood up. "All right," Delgado frowned. "Sergeant, is something going on?" "No," Ethan said. "Thank you, Delgado." He left the gym and stood outside in the early morning air and breathed for a moment, and he thought about a woman who stayed in a room because someone had once stayed in a room for her, and he thought about what kind of mother that woman would be, and the thought arrived before he could stop it, and then it was just there sitting in the open, unavoidable. He went back to his quarters and he called her. She picked up on the second ring. "Sergeant Brooks." "You have caller ID," he said. "I have a good memory for numbers," she said. "How's the knee inflammation?" "Nothing structural." "Good." She waited. She was very good at waiting. He had the sense that she could outwait almost anyone. "I have questions," he said. "I expected you would." "Not over the phone." A pause. "Where somewhere neutral," he said. "Not the hospital. There's a diner off Route 9 Callaway side, Henderson's." "I know it." "Tomorrow, 7 in the morning." "7 works," she said. "I'm off at 6:30. "Then I'll see you at 7. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment and noticed that his pulse was completely normal. That was either a sign that he was very calm about this or a sign that he had spent so many years training his body not to react that it no longer knew when reacting was appropriate. He hadn't fully decided which. Henderson's diner at 7 in the morning was exactly what it always was, busy enough to provide cover loud enough to make private conversation possible, staffed by a woman named Darlene, who had been pouring coffee there since approximately the Truman administration and who moved through the room with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped finding people surprising. Ethan arrived 4 minutes early. Rebecca arrived at 7, exactly still in the scrub she had worn for the end of her shift, her hair down for the first time, which made her look slightly less like a person who had already won every argument she'd ever had, and slightly more like a person who was tired and trying not to show it. She sat down across from him. Darlene appeared, filled both their cups without being asked, and vanished. "You look like you haven't slept," Ethan said. "I worked a 12-hour night shift," she said. "I look exactly like what I am." She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Ask your questions. He had written them down, not because he couldn't remember them, but because he wanted to make sure he asked the ones that actually mattered and didn't get distracted by the ones that just felt urgent. He had a list of 7. He left the paper in his pocket and started from memory. What happens if something goes wrong medically, he said, during the pregnancy? What if it's your plan? I'm an RN in a fully staffed military hospital with access to OB and maternal fetal medicine. My prenatal care would be handled on site. I have full insurance coverage. What if something goes wrong after with the child's health? I have a savings account with 8 months of expenses. I have a support system, my mother, 2 close friends, one of whom is a pediatric nurse practitioner. She met his eyes. I don't do things without a net. What do you tell the child, he said, when they ask about their father? That one landed differently. He watched her feel it and decide how to answer it honestly. The truth, she said, that their father was a good man who made a deliberate choice to give them life, and that his role was different from a traditional father, but no less real. She paused. I won't make you a ghost, and I won't make you a villain. You'd be what you actually are, a person who said yes to something difficult because it mattered. And if the child wants to know me, Ethan said, not just know about me, actually know me. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. That, she said carefully, would be a conversation for when that moment comes. The document leaves it open. It's not foreclosed. She looked at him. Is that something you'd want? He hadn't expected the question to come back at him. He considered it with the same honesty he was asking of her. I don't know yet, he said. That's an honest answer, she said. I don't have any other kind. She almost smiled. It was brief and controlled, and it changed her face considerably. I've noticed, she said. He picked up his coffee. What happened with the IUI, he asked. You said 2 rounds. What went wrong? The almost smile went away. The first round, the timing was off, and the cycle failed. The second round produced a viable pregnancy that ended at 9 weeks. She said it the way she said most things, evenly, with precision, but underneath the evenness was something that had weight to it. That was 14 months ago. He didn't say he was sorry. People said they were sorry, and it never helped, and she didn't look like a woman who needed to be told that someone was sorry. What he said was, 14 months is a long time to carry something like that. She looked at him. It is, she said quietly. Yes. They were both silent for a moment. Darlene appeared, refilled their cups, and left again without comment, which was exactly the right thing to do. Why not adopt? Ethan asked. I considered it, she said. I still consider it. It's not off the table for the future. But right now in this window, I want to try what I haven't exhausted yet. She looked at her hands. I want to carry a child. I want that specific experience if I can have it. That's not a criticism of adoption. It's just where I am. And the legal document, he said. Who drafted it? A family law attorney named Susan Park, 12 years in practice. She specializes in non-traditional family structures, donor arrangements, co-parenting agreements, second-parent adoptions. She reached into the bag she had carried in and withdrew a manila folder, set it on the table between them, and slid it toward him. This is a draft, not final. Everything in here is open to revision. He looked at the folder without picking it up. You brought it. I thought you might want to see it. You were right. He picked it up. He didn't open it yet. If I say no, he said, what happens? Rebecca looked at him steadily. You say no. I thank you for your time. I keep looking. She paused. There's no version of this where I'm angry at you for saying no. That's not what this is. What is it? He asked. She thought about it, genuinely thought about it, not reaching for the prepared answer. It's me believing, she said slowly, that the right way to build something real is to be honest about what you need and let people choose freely. I need something. I'm telling you, you choose. She shrugged very slightly. That's it. That's the whole thing. He put the folder down. He looked at her across the table, tired, direct, holding a 12-hour night shift and a 14-month grief and a lifelong plan in her body like they were just weather she had learned to dress for, and he said, tell me something about yourself that's not in the file. She blinked. What? Something personal. Something that didn't make it into a service record or a hospital intake form. She was still for a moment, and he could see her deciding whether this was a reasonable request and concluding that it was, even if it surprised her. I grew up in Shreveport, she said. We didn't have a lot. My mother worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. I put myself through nursing school on loans and a night shift at a packaging warehouse. She paused. I have a dog named Harold. He's 12 years old and he's going blind, and I have rearranged my entire apartment so he doesn't walk into things. She looked at Ethan levelly. That's probably more than you needed. No, he said. That's exactly right. She held his gaze for a moment. Your turn? She said. He raised an eyebrow. My turn? Something that's not in your file. He had not expected this either. He considered it. I wanted to be a teacher, he said. High school history. I had the application halfway filled out when my brother enlisted and I followed him instead. He looked at his coffee. He didn't make it back. I stayed in because leaving felt like abandoning the thing that had taken him. The silence that followed that was the kind that means something was received and held carefully and not immediately responded to, because some things don't need a response. They need to be acknowledged without being handled. I'm sorry, she said. And unlike most people who said it, she left it exactly there without adding anything, without trying to make it smaller or larger than it was. He nodded once. They sat in that silence for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Outside, the diner carried on. Someone at the counter ordered the special. A child at a nearby table knocked over a glass of orange juice and started to cry. Darlene materialized with a cloth. I need a week, Ethan said finally. You can have whatever you need, she said. I'm going to read the document, he said. I'm going to ask my own lawyer to look at it. That's exactly what you should do, she said. I'd expect nothing less. He picked up the folder. He looked at her one more time. You're not what I expected, he said, from the first 10 minutes. What did you expect? I don't know exactly. Someone more. He stopped. Someone who needed more from me than you seem to. She considered that for a moment. I need quite a lot from you, she said carefully. I just don't need you to be more than you are. What you are seems like enough. She stood, picked up her bag, left 2 folded bills on the table for the coffee. 1 week, she said, or more if you need it. There's no pressure on the clock. He watched her walk toward the door, and then because something about it mattered to him, he said, Mitchell. She turned. The soldier you stayed with, he said, after everything was stabilized, that night in the hospital. Did it work? Staying there, did it actually help him? She thought about it. He told me 6 weeks later that he'd been thinking about quitting, she said, before he deployed, and that the night I stayed was the first time since he had enlisted that he felt like he was worth someone's time. She met Ethan's eyes across the diner. So yes, I think it worked. She pushed through the door and was gone. Ethan sat alone at the table with the manila folder in front of him and Darlene's coffee cooling in his cup, and he thought about a soldier who almost quit and a nurse who stayed, in a decision that hadn't been made yet, but was already beginning to make itself in the slow and quiet way that the most important decisions always do, not with a crash. Not with a revelation, but with the steady accumulation of small, true things that eventually it became impossible to ignore. He opened the folder. The lawyer's name was Carl Whitfield, and he had been handling military legal matters out of a small office on the edge of Fort Calloway for 11 years. He was 61, methodical, and he had the specific kind of patience that comes from spending a career watching people make decisions they weren't ready for. Ethan had used him twice before, once for a power of attorney for deployment, once for a property dispute involving his late brother's truck. Whitfield knew how to read something without editorializing, which was the quality Ethan valued most in a person. He sat across from Whitfield on Thursday morning and watched the man read through the draft agreement page by page without expression. The office was quiet. A clock on the wall moved through its seconds with the indifference of all clocks. Ethan sat with his hands loose in his lap and waited. Whitfield turned the last page. He set the document down. He took his glasses off and looked at Ethan. This is a well-drafted agreement, he said. Is it airtight? Nothing is airtight, Whitfield said. But this is as close as you get outside a courtroom. The attorney who wrote this knew what she was doing. The language around parental rights is clear. The financial terms are explicit. The provisions for the child's right to information about you at age of majority are thoughtfully constructed. He tapped the corner of the document. Whoever drafted this was protecting everyone in the room, including you. What are my risks? Ethan said. Whitfield leaned back. In a standard donor arrangement, your primary risks are three. One, a court could override the agreement if the mother later sought child support and the judge decided the child's welfare required your financial involvement. Two, the child at 18 could seek a legal relationship with you, regardless of your preferences. Three, emotionally. He paused. That last one isn't in any document, but it's the one I've seen cause the most damage. What do you mean? I mean, I've seen men sign papers that clearly define their role, and then 3 years later, they're sitting in my office because they found out there's a child in the world who carries their name in their DNA, and they don't know what to do with that. Whitfield looked at him directly. It's not a legal question at that point. It's a human one. And human questions are harder to resolve than legal ones. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What would you do, he asked, if you were me? Whitfield seemed mildly surprised by the question. He thought about it with the deliberateness of a man who had learned not to answer things too quickly. I would ask myself whether I could live with both outcomes, he said finally. Whether I said yes and the child never wanted to know me, or whether I said yes and one day they showed up at my door. Both of those are real possibilities. If you can live with both, then your answer is yes. If either one of those possibilities breaks something in you, then your answer is no, and there's no shame in that. Ethan drove back to base with the document on the passenger seat and Whitfield's question sitting somewhere behind his sternum where it could not be easily dislodged. He thought about both outcomes with the systematic clarity he applied to mission planning. He tried to imagine a child who never reached out. He tried to imagine a knock on a door 20 years from now. He held each one up and looked at it. Neither one destroyed him. Neither one was easy. But the question underneath both of them, the real question, was simpler than any of the logistical ones and harder to answer for exactly that reason. Did he want this? Not could he handle it. Not was it legal. Not was she credible. Did he want it? He did not have the answer yet. But he noticed that the question no longer scared him, and that felt significant. He called her on Friday. I've had the document reviewed, he said. And it's sound, the attorney was thorough. Susan Park is excellent, Rebecca said. What else? I have one more question, he said. Not a logistical one. She waited. Why now, he said. You're 36, that's not a crisis yet. You have time. So why now this way, this fast? The pause that followed was longer than her usual pauses. 2 weeks ago, she said, I treated a woman who came in with her daughter. The daughter was 4 years old and had a fever of 103, and the whole time we were working on her, the mother never let go of her hand. Not once, not for the entire time they were in that room. She stopped. I've seen 1,000 patients, but I couldn't stop watching that woman's hand. Another pause. I walked to my car that night and I sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes and I thought about what I was waiting for. And I couldn't come up with a good enough answer. Ethan said nothing. I know it sounds impulsive, Rebecca said, but it isn't. This has been coming for a long time. That night was just the night I stopped pretending I had more time than I do. He thought about a woman sitting in a parking lot for 40 minutes deciding to stop pretending. He thought about how much courage that specific kind of decision required, not the dramatic kind of courage, not the kind that gets witnessed and celebrated, but the quiet internal kind that no one ever sees or credits. All right, he said. She was quiet for exactly 1 second. All right, you're still thinking about it? Or all right, you've decided? All right, I've decided, he said. Yes. The silence on the line was very different from the one before it. It had a texture to it. Something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite disbelief and was possibly both things pressed up against each other. Are you sure? She asked. Her voice was still controlled, but underneath it, something had shifted. I'm sure. I need you to be very sure, Ethan. It was the first time she had used his first name. He noticed it. He suspected she had too. I've been running this through for 5 days, he said. I've consulted a lawyer. I've asked myself Whitfield's question probably 30 times. I'm sure. What question? Whether I can live with both outcomes, he said. The one where the child never seeks me out and the one where they do. I can live with both. That tells me the answer. She breathed out slow and even. Okay, she said. Okay. And then quietly, more quietly than anything he had heard from her before. Thank you. He had not expected those two words to hit the way they did. He absorbed them without comment. What's the next step? He said. We finalize the document, both attorneys sign off, and then… She paused. We take it one step at a time. One step at a time, he agreed. They met the following Wednesday at Susan Park's office, a clean and professional space on the third floor of a building downtown that smelled like printer paper and good sense. Susan Park was 45, sharp-eyed, with the brisk warmth of someone who had facilitated enough complicated human arrangements to feel genuine compassion for all parties without making it maudlin. She reviewed the revisions Whitfield had suggested. Rebecca and Ethan each read the final document through completely, and they signed on a gray Wednesday morning with a notary present and the sound of traffic 4 stories below. It felt, Ethan thought, like signing the most serious document he had ever signed, which was saying something for a man who had signed deployment orders 3 times. The notary stamped it. Susan Park filed her copy. Rebecca put hers in her bag. Ethan folded his and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Outside on the sidewalk, they stood for a moment in the light of a late morning that had not yet decided if it was going to be warm or cold. Coffee, Rebecca said. Not like a question that expected a particular answer, more like the natural next thing. Yeah, Ethan said. Coffee. They walked 2 blocks to a place that was not Henderson's different territory, different geography, which felt right for a different phase of something, and they sat across from each other with a signed document between them in the form of 2 folded papers, one in her bag and one against his chest, and for the first time since they had met, neither of them had a list of things to work through. How are you feeling? She asked. Honestly, always? Strange, he said. Not bad strange, just strange. Like I made a decision I didn't know I was capable of making. He looked at his coffee, which is unusual for me. I make decisions for a living. This is different than operational decisions, she said. Yeah, he said. This one doesn't come with a briefing. She almost smiled again, that brief, controlled thing that meant something real had landed. No, she said, it doesn't. What about you, he said. How are you feeling? She thought about it with the same seriousness she brought to everything. Terrified, she said, and more settled than I've felt in a year. She shook her head slightly. Those 2 things shouldn't be able to exist at the same time, but apparently they can. Terror and clarity usually travel together, Ethan said. In my experience, if you're not at least a little scared, you probably haven't understood the size of what you're doing. She looked at him for a moment. Who taught you that? My brother, he said. She received that carefully, the way she received everything that mattered. He sounds like he was a good man, she said. He was the best man I knew, Ethan said. For a long time after he died, but I didn't know what to do with the parts of myself that were his. The things I learned from him, the way I saw things because of him. He paused. It takes a while to figure out that those things don't belong to the grief. They belong to you. He gave them to you, and they're yours to keep. The silence that followed that was the specific kind of silence that means something important has been said, and both people in the room know it, and neither of them wants to diminish it by moving on too quickly. Then Rebecca's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Something tightened around her eyes. I have to take this, she said. I'm sorry. She stepped away from the table and Ethan watched her from across the room, her back to him, one hand pressed flat against her opposite arm, the way people stand when they're absorbing something difficult. The call lasted 4 minutes. When she came back, she sat down and she was contained again, fully contained, every door closed, and he recognized that she had needed those 4 minutes to rebuild the composure that the call had threatened. Everything okay? He asked. My mother, she said. She had a fall last week. She's in a rehab facility in Shreveport. She didn't tell me until today. He watched her face. How bad? And fractured wrist, minor concussion. She's okay. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug again, the way she had that first morning at Henderson's. She didn't want to worry me. She sound like you, he said. Rebecca looked up at him. What do you mean, someone who doesn't want to be a burden, he said, so she carries things alone until she can't. The look on her face told him he had said something true that she hadn't quite articulated to herself. She looked down at the table for a moment. I'm going to drive down this weekend, she said. I should see her. You should, he said. She looked back up. I haven't told her yet. About this. A pause. About you. What will you tell her? The truth, she said immediately. And then more slowly, when I figure out which parts of the truth to start with. He nodded. She'll have questions. She'll have opinions, Rebecca said, with a flatness that carried 20 years of history inside it. My mother and questions are not the same thing. She goes directly to opinions. Will she approve? He asked. Rebecca looked at him steadily. She'll think you're real, she said. She has a very good detector of real versus not real. She'll figure you out in about 6 minutes, and then she'll have an opinion about whether this is right or whether I've lost my mind. A pause. The two things are not mutually exclusive in her view. Ethan found himself genuinely amused by that, and apparently it showed, because Rebecca's controlled expression cracked open just slightly into something warmer. Don't laugh, she said. She's terrifying. I wasn't laughing, he said. You were about to. I was about to, he admitted. They looked at each other across the table, and for a moment the weight of everything they had just signed and everything that was now in motion sat between them. And instead of being crushing, it was almost manageable, almost ordinary, because they were two people sitting in a coffee shop in the middle of a Wednesday who had just agreed to do something enormous and were now talking about a mother in Shreveport who went directly to opinions, and the normalcy of it was startling and good. Then the door of the coffee shop swung open and Dr. Gerald Harmon walked in. He didn't see them immediately. He was talking to someone on his phone loud enough for half the room to hear, with the easy arrogance of a man who had never once considered that other people's conversations might be worth more than his own. He moved to the counter. He ordered something. He turned. He saw Rebecca first. His expression arranged itself into something that was not quite a smile. Mitchell, he said, moving toward them without invitation, I didn't know you came to this part of town. It's a public place, she said. Her voice was entirely level. His eyes moved to Ethan. They traveled over him the way certain men's eyes travel over other men, calculating, measuring, arriving at a conclusion that was based mostly on themselves. Friend of yours, he said. Yes, Ethan said, before Rebecca could answer. He said it without particular emphasis, but with the kind of certainty that closes a line of inquiry. Harmon looked at him for a moment. Something passed between them that had no words, the specific exchange between two people who have both been in enough rooms to understand power dynamics without having to discuss them. I didn't catch your name, Harmon said. Sergeant Ethan Brooks, Ethan said. Fort Calloway. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Harmon's posture. Not much, just enough. Military, he said. Yes. Harmon looked back at Rebecca. You're not on the schedule tomorrow, he said. Gaines said you swapped shifts. I have a personal matter, she said. Gaines approved it. I need the Miller case notes compiled by Friday. They'll be compiled by Friday, she said. I'm off tomorrow, not resigning. Harmon held her gaze for a moment longer than was necessary. It was the kind of look that was designed to remind someone of a power differential without having to say it out loud. Then he glanced once more at Ethan, recalibrated something privately, and said, fine. He took his coffee from the counter and left. The door swung shut behind him. Rebecca did not watch him go. She kept her eyes on the table and breathed through whatever the last 90 seconds had deposited in her chest. Slow and methodical, the way Ethan had come to understand was her specific method for processing things she refused to let show. He does that often, Ethan said. Not a question. Often enough, she said. Has he ever crossed a line with you formally? She looked up. Define formally. Filed reports, documented incidents, threatened your position in writing. He doesn't do it in writing, she said. Men like that never do it in writing. They do it in hallways, and they do it in front of witnesses who are afraid to corroborate, and they do it in the language of professional concern so that when you describe it later, you sound paranoid. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How long has this been going on? 3 years, she said. Since I refused to falsify a triage report that would have covered a mistake he made. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said things she had long since accepted as the shape of her life. He couldn't fire me. The report was already filed with the department head. but he's been making the environment as uncomfortable as possible ever since. 3 years, Ethan said. Yes, and you stayed. I'm good at my job, she said, and my patients need me, and leaving would have felt like letting him win. She paused. I don't let people win by walking away. I wait them out. He looked at her. Something that had been quietly assembling itself over the past week settled into a final position. He had spent 5 days asking himself whether she was credible, whether she was stable, whether she was the kind of person whose judgment he could trust with something this large. He had the answer now. He had had it for a while, he realized. He had just needed to make sure he was reading it right. You should document what just happened, he said. Every interaction like that one. Date time witnesses exact words. Do it consistently. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. That sounds like the beginning of a plan, she said. It is the beginning of a plan, he said. And she looked at him across the table, the woman who had rebuilt her apartment for a blind dog and stayed in rooms for strangers and driven herself to parking lots alone to make the hardest decisions of her life. And something in her face said that she was not used to people making plans on her behalf, and that it was going to take her a moment to know what to do with it. She looked down at her coffee. One step at a time, she said quietly. One step at a time, he said. She drove to Shreveport that Saturday and came back on Sunday night, and Ethan knew she was back because she texted him at 10:47 with 3 words. She took it. He stared at those 3 words for a moment, then typed back, good or bad, and she replied, both, which he understood completely. He didn't push for more that night. He understood that some conversations needed to be slept on before they could be had properly, and he had the sense that whatever had happened between Rebecca and her mother in that rehab facility in Shreveport was the kind of thing that needed to settle before it could be examined clearly. So he put his phone down and he let it settle. She called him Monday morning before her shift, standing in the parking lot of Fort Calloway Medical Center, with the engine of her car still ticking behind her. He knew that because she told him in the specific way she relayed logistical details not as small talk, but as context. She was building a picture for him. He had noticed she always did that. She cried, Rebecca said. That's the first thing. My mother doesn't cry, Mo. I've seen her cry twice in my life, once when her sister died, once when I graduated nursing school. She cried for about 4 minutes and then she stopped and she looked at me and she said, tell me about him. Ethan said, what did you tell her? The truth, Rebecca said. What he does, what I observed, what made me trust him. A pause. I told her about Delgado, about the 300 yards. And, she said, that's a man who carries things. And then she said, does he know what he's getting into? What did you say? I said, I thought you did. Another pause, shorter this time. I hope that was accurate. It was accurate, he said. She breathed out quietly. She wants to meet you at some point. She was very clear that she was not demanding it, and very clear that she absolutely expected it to happen eventually, which is exactly how my mother makes demands. She declares them optional and then stares at you until they're not. Despite himself, Ethan smiled. She sounds formidable. She is, Rebecca said. She also said, and I'm telling you this because I think you should know, she said that whatever happens, she's glad I stopped waiting. Those were her words. A pause. She said she'd been watching me wait for the right moment for so long she'd started to think the waiting had become the thing itself. Ethan sat with that for a moment. He knew something about waiting becoming the thing itself. He had spent 3 years after his brother died, waiting to feel ready to make decisions again. He hadn't noticed it happening. That was the thing about that kind of waiting. It was invisible from the inside. Your mother's a smart woman, he said. Infuriatingly so, Rebecca said. I have to go in. I'll talk to you later. Mitchell, he said before she could hang up. Yes. I know what I'm getting into, he said. The quiet on the line was brief and full. Good, she said, and then she was gone. The procedure was scheduled for the following Thursday. Susan Park had coordinated with Rebecca's OB, a calm and efficient doctor named Dr. Nadia Osei, who operated out of a women's health clinic 20 minutes from the base. Ethan had met her once briefly at Rebecca's request, not because his presence was medically necessary, but because Rebecca had said she wanted everyone in this process to be in the same room at least once before anything happened. It was the kind of logistical thinking he recognized from his own professional life. You don't deploy with people you have never briefed with. Dr. O.C. had shaken his hand, assessed him in approximately 11 seconds in the way that competent people assess strangers and said, "This is a good plan. She's been a good patient. I'll take good care of her." 3 sentences, all of them exactly what needed to be said. He did not go to the clinic on Thursday. That was not his role, and he understood his role clearly. He went to work, ran his unit through a training exercise in the morning, completed 3 hours of administrative work he had been putting off, and ate lunch alone in his office. He checked his phone twice. He put it face down both times. He was not anxious in any way he could identify. He was something else, something that didn't have a clean name, the way most real feelings don't have clean names. She texted him at 2:17 in the afternoon. "Done. Heading home. I'll let you know." He texted back, "Rest." She sent back a single thumbs up, which was so uncharacteristic of her spare, precise communication style that it almost made him laugh. The 2-week wait, which is what Dr. O.C. had called it, with the flat medical accuracy of someone who had guided many people through many 2-week waits, was its own particular kind of discipline. Ethan occupied himself, the way he always occupied himself. When there was nothing to be done but wait, he worked harder, ran longer, slept deliberately. He called his mother twice, which was more than his usual once a week, and she noticed but didn't say anything, because she was the kind of woman who knew that when her son called twice in 1 week, he needed to hear her voice, not explain why. He and Rebecca talked every 2 or 3 days, not about the procedure, about other things the way 2 people do when they are in the middle of something large and need to remind themselves that they are still themselves apart from it. She told him about a patient who had brought her homemade tamales as a thank you. He told her about a 20-year-old private in his unit who kept writing letters to a girl back home in Ohio and asking Ethan to proofread them, which he did because the kid was earnest in a way that was impossible to dismiss. She laughed at that, a real laugh, not the controlled, almost smile, a genuine sound that he heard for the first time over the phone, and noted the way you note the first time a locked room opens. 12 days into the wait, she called him at 8 in the morning. He answered on the first ring. "I tested early," she said. Her voice was very still. "And," he said. She didn't answer immediately, and that pause, that specific weighted pause, told him the answer before she said it. "It's positive," she said. Everything in him went very quiet. The kind of quiet that is not emptiness, but the opposite of emptiness, too full to have room for noise. "You tested early," he said. I know I shouldn't have. I couldn't." She stopped. He heard her take a breath. "I couldn't wait the full 2 weeks. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," he said. Don't," he said gently. "Not yet. Let it be what it is right now." Another breath. "Okay," she said. Her voice was different. Not broken, she was not a person who broke easily. But the containment was down, all the way down, and what was underneath it was something raw and real and enormous. "It's positive," she said again, as though saying it a second time was how she made it real. "I know," he said. They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking, and that silence was nothing like the early silences, not strategic, not measured. It was just 2 people on either end of a phone holding something new and fragile and almost too large to hold, doing it together. "Call Dr. Osei," he said finally. "I will. First appointment." She paused. "Ethan." "Yeah. Thank you," she said. Again, the same 2 words as before, but different now, heavier, more specific, carrying the weight of a thing that had actually happened and not just been agreed to. He didn't know what to say that was proportionate to that, so he said what was true. "Take care of yourself today," he said. "And tell Harold I said hello." She made a sound that was half laugh, half something else. "He's sleeping on my coat again," she said. "He can't see it, but he knows where it is." "Smart dog," Ethan said. "Infuriatingly so," she said, and he could hear the smile in it, real and full. And then she hung up. He sat in his quarters for 10 minutes without moving. He was trying to locate what he was feeling with precision, the way he always tried to locate things with precision, because imprecision in feelings had the same consequence as imprecision in everything else. It led you somewhere you hadn't planned to go. What he found when he looked carefully enough was something that sat between wonder and gravity. Not fear, not regret. Wonder and gravity. The awareness that the world was now configured in a way it had not been configured before, and that he was in some real sense responsible for that, and that the responsibility was not a burden. It was a weight he had chosen and would carry willingly. He stood up. He had a unit to run. Dr. Osei confirmed the pregnancy 8 days later and scheduled Rebecca's first formal prenatal appointment. Rebecca sent Ethan the date and time without commentary, and he blocked it on his calendar. And then she sent a follow-up message that said simply, "You don't have to come if it's complicated." And he sent back, "I'll be there." And she didn't respond. But he understood by now that when she didn't respond, it meant the thing had landed and she was deciding where to put it. He was in the waiting room of the women's health clinic at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, still in his uniform, because he had come directly from an early briefing. He did not look out of place. He looked like what he was, a soldier who had cleared his schedule to be somewhere that mattered. Rebecca arrived 2 minutes after him, saw him standing by the reception desk, and stopped for just a fraction of a second. That fraction of a second was the closest he had ever seen her come to being visibly surprised. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he said. She nodded once, pressed her lips together briefly, and checked in at the desk. They sat side by side in the waiting room. Him in his uniform, her in her civilian clothes, a stack of outdated magazines on the table between them that neither of them touched. The room was full of women at various stages of pregnancy, a few with partners, a few alone. No one paid them any particular attention, which was fine. "Are you nervous?" he asked her. "Yes," she said without any hesitation. "I'm terrified they'll find something wrong." "That's normal," he said. "I know it's normal. Knowing it's normal doesn't help." He almost said something reassuring. He stopped himself. She wasn't a person who needed things smoothed over. She needed to be heard as she was. "No," he said. "Probably not." She looked at him sideways. "That's the least comforting thing anyone said to me this week. Do you want comfort or do you want honesty?" She thought about it. "Both," she said, "in that order." "Okay," he said. "It's going to be scary every time until it isn't. And then it'll be scary again in a different way. That's the honest part." He paused. "The comfortable part is that you're in good hands. You're healthy and you've prepared for this more thoroughly than anyone I've ever met. And I've met people who planned for things that had a much lower survival margin than childbirth." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very military way to frame prenatal care." "I'm a very military person." "I noticed." But she said it without the edge it might have had coming from someone else. She said it like it was a fact she had made peace with and possibly liked. They called her name 20 minutes later. She stood, and then she paused, and she looked at him with an expression he had learned to read now, the one that meant she was going to say something she had evaluated carefully and decided was worth the risk of saying. "Will you come in?" she said. "You don't have to, but I'd like it if you did." He stood up. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go." What happened in that appointment was not dramatic in any external way. There was an ultrasound. There was a small screen. There was a sound, fast, rhythmic, impossibly fast, that Dr. Osei identified in her calm, professional voice as the fetal heartbeat at approximately 6 weeks. Ethan stood in the corner of the room and listened to that sound and felt something shift in him that he did not have a name for and did not try to name. Rebecca lay on the table and watched the screen and did not cry, but her jaw was set in the specific way that meant she was working hard not to. She reached out her hands slightly toward the edge of the table, not consciously, he thought, and without thinking about it, he moved forward and held it. She gripped his hand once hard and then eased. That was all. That was enough. Dr. Osei printed a picture from the screen. Rebecca held it on the driving out to the parking lot, looking at it the way people look at things they can't quite believe are real. They stood in the parking lot. The day was cool and ordinary. Somewhere across town, a normal Tuesday was happening for thousands of people who did not know that the world had quietly reorganized itself around a heartbeat the size of a grain of rice. "I want to frame this," Rebecca said, still looking at the image. "Then frame it," he said. She looked up at him. "Ethan." She stopped. She tried again. "I need you to know that whatever happens from here, whatever the arrangement looks like, whatever your level of involvement ends up being, I am not going to let this child grow up not knowing that their father was a good man." She held his gaze. "That's not negotiable for me. Whatever else is flexible, that isn't." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I mean that literally," he said. I'm not going anywhere. The arrangement is a legal document. What I actually do is going to be different from the minimum the document requires. I haven't figured out all of it yet, but I know that much. Something moved across her face, a series of things actually arriving in quick succession, too fast for her usual control to manage all of them, or apprised then something that might have been relief, deep enough to almost be grief, then something that settled into a warmth she didn't try to contain. She looked away briefly, looked back. You didn't have to say that, she said. I know, he said. That's why I said it. She pressed her lips together for a moment. She was not, he had learned, someone who cried easily. But her eyes were very bright right now, and she was breathing with the particular care of someone managing a feeling that wanted to be larger than the moment allowed. Harold is going to be very confused, she said. Ethan almost laughed. He controlled it. Harold is going to be fiant, he said. He doesn't like change. He'll adapt. He looked at her. So will we. She nodded again, and this time the nod had a different quality to it, not just acknowledgement, but something closer to acceptance. The full acceptance of a thing that had been theoretical and was now real, the way a decision becomes different the moment you stop being able to undo it. And then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went flat. It's Harmon, she said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Answer it, he said. She did. She turned slightly away from him, and he watched her posture change not into submission, but into the contained stillness of a person managing an adversary. He could hear Harmon's voice through the phone, not the words but the register of it, authoritative clip, the voice of a man who had decided he was owed compliance. Rebecca listened for 40 seconds. Then she said, I'm off today, Dr. Harmon. This can wait until my shift tomorrow. A pause, then that's not my role, and you know that. Another pause longer. I'll review it when I'm in. Goodbye. She hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand for a moment. He wants me to come in, she said. Someone called in sick. He's framing it as a professional obligation. Is it? No, she said. I have no contractual obligation to cover on my off days unless it's an emergency situation. He knows that. Have you been documenting? He asked. Every incident since the coffee shop, she said. Date-time witnesses, direct quotes where I can recall them precisely. I have 16 entries in 3 weeks. Something resolved in Ethan's expression. Good, he said. 16 is enough. She looked at him. Enough for what? To file a formal complaint with the hospital's compliance office, he said. And with the nursing board if it comes to that. He met her eyes. You've been waiting him out. I understand why. But you're about to have a pregnancy that's going to require schedule accommodations, and a supervisor who has been systematically making your environment hostile for 3 years is a liability now in a way he wasn't before. She was quiet for a moment. Not the resistant kind of quiet, the processing kind. If I file a complaint, he'll make it worse before the process resolves, she said. That's what men like that do. They escalate. I know, Ethan said, which is why you won't do it alone. He held her gaze. I know people at this JAG office. I know the base commander personally, and I know how institutional accountability works from the inside. A pause. He's been winning because you've been fighting this by yourself. That changes now. She looked at him for a long time. He had the impression she was doing what she always did, evaluating, weighing, running variables, but this time the calculation was different because the variable had changed. She was no longer calculating alone. There was someone else in the equation. You don't have to do this, she said. This isn't part of the agreement. No, he said, it isn't. He met her eyes. That's why I'm doing it. She looked at the ultrasound image still in her hand. She looked back at him. And for the first time since they had stood in an emergency room 3 weeks ago, with 43 minutes between them, she let him see all of it, the exhaustion of 3 years of fighting the terror of carrying something new and precious, the specific loneliness of a woman who had built every backup plan except the one where someone else showed up. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he said. And they stood in that ordinary parking lot with an extraordinary piece of paper between them, and for the first time in a very long time, neither one of them was carrying the whole thing alone. The complaint was filed on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, Gerald Harmon knew about it. Ethan had not expected the process to be invisible. He had expected exactly what happened, a man who had operated without consequence for 3 years, discovering that the rules had changed and reacting the way such men always react, which was badly and immediately. What he had not expected was how fast it would move or how ugly it would get before it got better. The compliance officer at Fort Calloway Medical Center was a woman named Patricia Vance, 53 years old, with the precise and patient energy of someone who had heard a great many stories and had learned to separate the ones that mattered from the ones that were just noise. Rebecca sat across from her with 16 documented incidents, dates, times, direct quotes, and the names of 3 nurses who had confirmed in writing that they had witnessed Harmon's conduct and had been too afraid to speak previously. Ethan sat beside her, not as her attorney and not as her partner in any official sense, but as a witness to the most recent incident and as a man who had spent 20 years learning how institutions work from the inside and was not going to let this one use its own slowness against her. Patricia Vance read through the documentation without expression. She asked clarifying questions in a measured, neutral voice. She did not minimize. She did not suggest that some of it might be misinterpretation. She read what was written and she asked what she needed to ask. And at the end, she set the documents down and said, "This is a substantial file, Nurse Mitchell." "Yes," Rebecca said, "it is." "How long have you been compiling this particular portion?" 3 weeks, Rebecca said. "Systematically. The incidents themselves go back 3 years. "Why now?" Vance asked. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "Because I have more to protect now than I did before," she said. "And because waiting him out stopped being a viable strategy." Vance looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite sympathy and not quite approval, but somewhere between both. "I'll begin the formal review process," she said. "Dr. Harmon will be notified and will have the opportunity to respond. In the meantime, I'm going to recommend a temporary reassignment of your direct supervisory chain so that your working conditions are not further impacted during the investigation." She looked at Ethan briefly. "Sergeant Brooks, your statement regarding the incident on the 14th is noted." "Thank you," he said. When they walked out of that office into the hallway, Rebecca moved 6 steps ahead before she stopped. She stood there for a moment with her back to him, very still, and he waited. Then she turned around and her face had the look of someone who has set down something very heavy and is not quite sure yet what to do with their empty hands. 3 years, she said. "I documented for 3 weeks and walked in there, and it took 40 minutes. "That's how it works sometimes," he said. "The filing is what the filing is. What matters is you did it." "I should have done it sooner," she said, and there was an edge of something in her voice, not self-pity, never that with her, but the sharp ache of time that cannot be recovered. "You did it when you were ready," he said, "and when you had enough to make it stick. That's not a failure, that's strategy." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're very good at reframing things," she said. "I've had a lot of practice," he said. "With yourself? Mostly," he said. She nodded slowly and the edge went out of her voice, and what replaced it was something quieter and more solid. "Let's go," she said, and they walked out together. Harmon's response to the investigation was precisely what Ethan had predicted, a combination of minimization, counter-allegation, and the specific weaponized professionalism of a man who had spent decades building institutional credibility as a shield. He filed a statement characterizing Rebecca's documentation as retaliatory, suggesting that her performance had been the actual issue and that his oversight had been appropriate and necessary. He cited 2 incidents from the previous year in which Rebecca had, in his words, demonstrated independent judgment that put patient workflow at risk. His language was careful and clinical and utterly unconvincing to anyone who had read the 16 entries alongside it. 3 of the nurses who had submitted corroborating statements were called into separate meetings with Vance's office. 2 of them held firm. The 3rd recanted enough of her statement to make it complicated, which was the thing Ethan had warned Rebecca might happen, and which she received without crumbling. "I expected it," she told him that night over the phone. "I'm disappointed, but I expected it. 2 out of 3 is still 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 is more than enough," he said. What Harmon had not anticipated, what men who had operated unchallenged for long enough never anticipated, was that the institutional machinery, once engaged properly, did not care about his credibility in the way he was accustomed to it caring. It cared about documentation. It cared about patterns. It cared about the specific, irrefutable weight of 16 incidents recorded with dates and direct quotes and corroborating witnesses, presented by a nurse with an impeccable clinical record and no prior disciplinary history in 11 years of practice. The formal finding came 6 weeks after the complaint was filed. Ethan was at his desk on base when his phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. 3 words again like she preferred when something large had resolved. He's been suspended. He read it twice. Then he typed back, pending what? She replied, pending full review, mandatory remediation program, reassignment if reinstated. Not fired yet, but the door's open. He put the phone down. He sat for a moment with the particular satisfaction of a man who has watched an institution do what it is supposed to do, which was rare enough to be worth noting. Then he picked the phone back up and typed, "You did that." Not we, you. She didn't reply for 4 minutes. Then we, and nothing else. Just the one word precise and deliberate in the way that everything she said was precise and deliberate. He accepted it. It was the most accurate thing either of them could have said. The pregnancy moved forward the way pregnancies do, not dramatically, not in great sweeping narrative arcs, but in the quiet accumulation of appointments and changes and small revelations that arrive one at a time and together add up to something overwhelming. Ethan attended every appointment that he was able to, which was most of them. He sat in waiting rooms in his uniform and drove her home afterward on the days she was too tired to feel like being alone in a car, which she never asked him to do, but which she also never refused when he offered. He learned the language of the appointments: fundal height, fetal position, gestational age, the way he learned every technical language that was relevant to a situation he was in, which was to say thoroughly and without complaint. Rebecca was 15 weeks along when her mother came to visit. Ethan had been warned. Rebecca had said the week before, "She's coming on Saturday. She wants to meet you. I told her you were a reasonable person, and she said that was exactly what someone would say about an unreasonable person, so prepare yourself." He had prepared himself. He had also, because it was simply the correct thing to do, asked Rebecca what her mother liked, and then made sure there was good coffee and the specific brand of lemon cookies that Rebecca had mentioned her mother preferred in a small bowl on the table. This was the kind of detail he paid attention to. It was also, he understood, the kind of detail that would matter to a woman who had raised a daughter alone on 2 jobs in Shreveport and who was now evaluating the man who had made her daughter's most complicated hope come true. Gloria Mitchell was 64 years old, 5'2", and had the specific, concentrated authority of a small woman who had never once in her life required size to make a point. She came through the door of Rebecca's apartment, a space Ethan had been in many times by now, rearranged furniture for Harold, and all looked at the cookies on the table, looked at Ethan and said, "You did your homework." "I try to," he said. She looked at him for another moment with the expression Rebecca used when she was running an evaluation, and which he now understood was purely genetic. Then she said, "Sit down. Let's talk." Harold the dog made his way across the room by memory and instinct and pressed himself against Gloria's ankles. She reached down and scratched his ears without looking at him, the automatic tenderness of a woman who had always made room for the things that came to her asking for something. They talked for 2 hours. Gloria asked questions with the directness of someone who had been waiting a long time to ask them and was not going to waste the opportunity on pleasantness. She asked about his service, his intentions, his family, his understanding of what he had agreed to and what he intended beyond it. She asked about his brother, and he told her, and she was silent for a moment, and then she said, "He'd have liked this. A man like that always likes it when the people he left behind do something worth doing." It was the most generous thing anyone had said to him in a long time, and it arrived without warning, and he absorbed it without letting it show, and she saw him absorb it, and she nodded once as though that confirmed something she had suspected. At the end of the 2 hours, Gloria stood up, straightened her cardigan, looked at her daughter and said, "He'll do." Then she looked at Ethan and said, "That's high praise from me. Ask her." Rebecca from the kitchen doorway said, "It is. Don't let it go to your head." And Ethan said, "I'll manage my ego." And Gloria said, "Good. Men with egos are a waste of everyone's time," and picked up her lemon cookie and bit into it with the satisfied air of a woman who had arrived at the correct conclusion. He drove home that evening with something sitting in his chest that he didn't examine too closely because it was large and warm, and the kind of thing that gets fragile if you look at it too directly. He had been called many things in his career. He had been evaluated and assessed and rated and recommended and passed over and decorated. None of those things had felt quite like two words from a 64-year-old woman in a cardigan who loved her daughter with the specific, non-negotiable ferocity of someone who had been her only protection for a very long time. He'll do. He slept better that night than he had in months. The call came on a Tuesday in Rebecca's 23rd week, and it came not from her but from a number he didn't immediately recognize. And when he answered it, the voice on the other end was young and slightly panicked and belonged to Rebecca's neighbor, a 20-something named Jess, who had a key to the apartment for Harold-related emergencies. "She's okay," Jess said immediately, which was the kind of opening that tells you someone is not entirely okay. "She's okay, but she had some pain, and she called Dr. Osei, and Dr. Osei said to go in, and I'm driving her now, and she said to tell you Ethan was already standing." "Which hospital?" "Fort Calloway Medical." "I'll be there in 12 minutes, he said. He was there in 9. The pain turned out to be round ligament pain, which Dr. Osei explained in her calm and factual way was common, uncomfortable, alarming to experience, and entirely benign in this case. The baby was fine. Rebecca's vitals were fine. Everything was fine. Rebecca sat on the exam table looking like a woman who had just come down from a significant amount of adrenaline and was not pleased about having generated it. "I knew it was probably nothing," she said. "I know what round ligament pain is. I'm a nurse." "You're also a pregnant woman, doctor," Osei said, "which is a different role, and you did exactly the right thing by calling." "I scared Jess," Rebecca said. "Jess will recover," Ethan said. He was standing in the corner of the exam room, the same corner he always stood in, and she looked at him across it, and something moved through her expression, complex and layered and too fast for him to entirely catalog. "You didn't have to come," she said. "You called," he said, "which means you wanted me here." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I called Jess," she said. "You told Jess to call me," he said. She looked at the ceiling briefly. "You're very literal. You appreciate that about me." She looked back at him, and for a moment the exam room was very quiet, and Dr. Osei seemed to find something requiring attention on her tablet. And Rebecca looked at Ethan across the room with the expression of someone who has run out of the specific kind of distance they have been maintaining and doesn't entirely mind. "Yes," she said, "I do." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. Dr. Osei cleared her throat gently. "Everything looks excellent," she said. "Go home. Rest. Drink water. Come back Thursday for your regular appointment." She looked at them both. "Both of you," she added, as though that were obvious, which by now it was. There was a conversation that happened 2 weeks after that, not in a hospital, and not in a diner, and not in a lawyer's office, but in Rebecca's apartment on a Sunday afternoon, when Harold was asleep on Ethan's foot, which had become a habit of Harold's that no one had planned and no one was going to address. And Rebecca was sitting across from him, with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, in the particular look of someone who has been arranging words for several days and has decided today is the day to say them. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay," he said. "The agreement," she said. "The one we signed. I've been thinking about it." He waited. "I think it was the right document for where we were," she said carefully. "When we signed it, I think it was honest about what we knew at the time." She paused. "I don't think it's the right document anymore." He looked at her steadily. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said slowly, "that what has happened between then and now is different from what I thought would happen." She looked down at her tea. "I thought I was asking for one specific thing from a man who would be peripheral to my life in a decause and manageable way. I thought I knew what I needed." She looked back up. "I was wrong about the second part." "Rebecca," he said. "Let me finish," she said, "because I've been practicing this, and if you say something now, I'll lose the thread." She took a breath. "I'm not asking you to be something you agreed not to be. I'm not changing the terms without your consent. What I'm saying is that I would like, if you would like to talk about what those terms actually are. Not the legal terms, the real ones." She held his gaze. "Because the real ones look different to me than they did 4 months ago, and I suspect they might look different to you too. And I would rather say that out loud than pretend I don't know it." The apartment was very quiet. Harold made a small sound in his sleep against Ethan's foot. Ethan had known for some time now that this conversation was coming. He had known because He was a person who paid attention, and what he had been paying attention to over the past 4 months was the specific texture of how a human life changes when it becomes entangled with another, not in the messy collateral way that most entanglements happen, but in the chosen, deliberate, eyes-open way that is so much rarer and so much harder and so much more real. He had been paying attention to a woman who rearranged her furniture for a blind dog and stayed in rooms for strangers and drove to Shreveport to tell her mother the truth and filed a complaint that 3 years of fear had postponed and held his hand in a dim ultrasound room and texted him 3 words when things resolved and 1 word when he tried to give her too little credit. He had been paying attention. He knew what he had found. He had known for a while. "You're right," he said. "They look different." She breathed out slowly. "Good," she said. "I was a little afraid I was reading that alone." "You weren't," he said. "I know," she said. "I know I wasn't. But knowing something and being willing to say it are 2 different things." "Yeah," he said. "I'm familiar with that gap." She looked at him. "So what do we do with this?" He thought about it with the seriousness it deserved. "We do what we've done with everything else," he said. "We figure out what's true. We say it. We take it 1 step at a time." She almost smiled. "You quoted me. You said something worth repeating." The almost smile became real. Not the brief, controlled version, the genuine one, the one he had first heard over the phone and had been quietly collecting ever since. "Okay," she said, "1 step at a time." Starting with, he said, "Maybe we stop pretending that Harold sleeping on my foot is something that just happens and isn't a whole situation." She laughed. It was the best sound in the room. "He chose you," she said. "He doesn't choose people. He can barely see them." "Smart dog," Ethan said. "He knows what he's doing." "Apparently so do I," she said quietly. He looked at her across the space between them. 4 months of accumulated truth, a legal document that no longer captured the shape of things, a heartbeat they had heard together in a dim room, an old dog dreaming on his foot. And he said with the simplicity of someone who has stopped needing things to be more complicated than they are, "Yeah, you do." The baby was born on a Thursday early by 9 days, which Dr. O.C. had said was possible, and which Rebecca had prepared for, and which happened anyway in the way that things you are prepared for still manage to arrive with their own specific weight. Ethan was there. He had always been going to be there. He stood in the room the way he had stood in every room across this entire thing, steady present, not taking up more space than the situation required, but not leaving either, because leaving had never once been on the table. When the baby was placed in Rebecca's arms for the first time, and she looked down at this new person with the expression of someone receiving something they had spent their whole life finding the courage to ask for, she looked up at Ethan and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything, because there are moments that words would only diminish. The nurse, a young woman early in her career, with the earnest attentiveness of someone who still felt the weight of every room she walked into, asked for the name for the birth certificate. Rebecca looked at the baby for a long moment. She looked at Ethan. "James," she said. "James Daniel Mitchell." She paused. "Daniel was my grandfather," she said quietly. James was his. Ethan did not trust himself to speak for a moment. He nodded once, slow and certain. The nurse wrote it down. James Daniel Mitchell came into the world named for the people who had shaped the people who had chosen him, and that was exactly right. And nothing about it was accidental, and everything about it had been decided with the full eyes and the full hearts of 2 people who understood that the most important things in a life are not the ones that happen to you, but the ones you are brave enough to choose. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning, Gloria Mitchell drove up from Shreveport with lemon cookies and the permanent authority of a woman who had always known exactly what she was doing, and she sat in the rearranged apartment with James on her chest and Harold asleep beside her and her daughter across from her, looking more rested and more whole than Gloria had seen her in years. And she looked at Ethan, where he stood in the kitchen doorway, and she said simply, "Good." 1 word, same as her daughter's, because some things run in families, and this precision was one of them. Ethan said, "Thank you, Gloria." And she said, "Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing." And he said, "I plan to." Rebecca looked at him from across the room with the full, unguarded steadiness of a woman who had spent her whole life building backup plans and had finally, for the first time, chosen to believe that she didn't need one because the thing itself, the real thing, the chosen and deliberate and fully seen thing, had turned out to be stronger than any contingency she could have constructed. She had asked a stranger for one specific thing. She had received in return everything she had been too careful to ask for. And it had arrived not through luck, not through accident, but through the courageous and irreversible act of saying out loud exactly what you need and trusting that the right person would hear it. She had been right to trust, and she would not stop being right about that for the rest of her life.